All right, hello everyone. So today is day 2 of the lesson on cellular respiration, but I'm going to start with a quick recap of stage 1. So stage 1, remember, was glycolysis, which started with our molecule of glucose getting broken down into 2 pyruvates, ATP and NADA, 2 of each. And this ATP and NADA is going to be saved until the end. We'll see them come back later. But right now we're going to focus on these pyruvates. So just a quick little review. If you think about the overall equation of cellular respiration, maybe you want to pause and go back and look at the equation. C6H12O6 plus 6O2 gives us 6CO2 plus 6H2O plus ATP. Okay. Which reactant from the overall cellular respiration equation is used up in glycolysis? If you guess glucose, you are right. So glucose is used in glycolysis, and it gets totally used. So once we've done glycolysis, we've used up the glucose from the original reaction. What about the products from the overall cellular respiration equation? Remember, we get pyruvate, NADA, and ATP. So which of those show up in the big equation? If you guessed ATP, you are right. And we get 2 of them. So 2 ATP come from glycolysis. So the rest of them things in the equation are going to be used up or used in a different step of the process, so they don't make it to the full equation. So we ended glycolysis with our molecule of pyruvate, and in doing so, we have to then move into the mitochondria, because remember, glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm. So here we are in the cytoplasm with the pyruvate. And in order to get into the mitochondria where the next step will take place, we have to do another change in molecule. So this time, pyruvate, which you can see here, has to be turned into a different molecule called acetyl-CoA. And acetyl-CoA is going to be the molecule that can enter the mitochondria. But notice, pyruvate has 1, 2, 3 carbons, and acetyl-CoA only has 2 carbons. So one of the byproducts of this reaction is a carbon dioxide molecule is released, and we also release a molecule of NADA. Again, that NADA will be saved for later. So we call these the intermediate reactions. It's not really an official step of cellular respiration, but cellular respiration can't happen the next step until we get this acetyl-CoA. So if it helps you to think of this as a second step, you can, but the real second step will be the Krebs cycle. So in the intermediate reaction, this is what happens in word form. Pyruvate from glycolysis gets turned into acetyl-CoA. And remember, we started with 2 pyruvates, and they therefore make 2 acetyl-CoAs, one from one pyruvate and one from the other. Because of this, since we're losing a carbon, that carbon molecule gets released as carbon dioxide. And since there's 2 pyruvates, 2 acetyl-CoAs, that releases 2 molecules of carbon dioxide. We also get that release of NADA, and now the Krebs cycle can begin because we're able to be inside the mitochondria. So this is the word form. Here is the next step as shown on the chart. So I'm going to show the intermediate reactions in green. So you can see our pyruvate is what's moving on to the next step, and that pyruvate is turned into acetyl-CoA. So we go from 1, 2, 3 carbons in pyruvate to 1, 2 carbons in acetyl-CoA. And that also causes us to release a molecule of carbon dioxide, which there's 1 carbon in carbon dioxide, and a molecule of NADA, which again will be saved for later. But notice, since there was 2 pyruvates, this happens twice. So there's 2 acetyl-CoAs, 2 NADAs, and 2 carbon dioxides. So if you count the total number of carbons, there's still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 total, just like how we started with glucose. So those are the intermediate reactions. Again, they have to take place so that acetyl-CoA can enter the mitochondria. Now we're going to move into the official second step, which is called the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle, I will probably most often call it the Krebs cycle, but its other name is the citric acid cycle. The main purpose of this step is metabolism, which is breaking stuff down, and energy production. So the Krebs cycle metabolism part is used to break down acetyl-CoA. So that's the metabolism part. We're breaking down acetyl-CoA. And then the energy that gets produced is ATP, NADA, and a new character, FADA2. Okay? FADA2 is very similar to NADA, and we'll talk about them both in just a second. But for the Krebs cycle, the most important things that are produced are NADA and FADA2. And again, we'll talk about them in just a second. This step requires oxygen. So that means that we're looking at an aerobic process. So this step does require oxygen. Now, what's interesting is you're not going to see oxygen used directly in this step, but this step goes right into the following step. So basically, once we're in the mitochondria, we finish out cellular respiration, and the final third step does require oxygen. So if no oxygen is present for that third step, the Krebs cycle will not occur. So that's what makes it aerobic. Even though we're not using oxygen in this step, it cannot happen if there's not oxygen ready for step 3 when this is done. It's called the Krebs cycle because you'll see it's circular and keeps going. And this step occurs in the mitochondrial matrix. So if you remember from last class, that is the fluid inside the mitochondria. So that is where the Krebs cycle takes place. So if you think about it, how are the Krebs cycle and glycolysis related? What product from glycolysis moves on to the Krebs cycle? And maybe you want to take a look and think about your intermediate reactions. If you guessed pyruvate, you're right, because the pyruvate from glycolysis gets used to make acetyl-CoA, which is going to be the start of the Krebs cycle. Now, one additional reminder is that NADA and FADA2 are high-energy electron carriers. They're the most important parts that are produced in the Krebs cycle because they're going to carry the high-energy electrons to the next stage, the final step. So they are really important in getting produced in the Krebs cycle. So that acetyl-CoA is broken down into carbon dioxide and citric acid. Remember, one of the main points of the Krebs cycle is to break down that acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA, when we go back, had 2 carbon atoms inside the molecule. You can see that here. So when we break it apart and release the carbon dioxide, each acetyl-CoA is going to release 2 carbon dioxides. When you have 2 acetyl-CoA molecules, then that's going to release 4 total carbon dioxide molecules. If you add those to the 2 from the intermediate reactions, then the total amount of CO2 that's been released is how many? 4 plus 2 is 6 CO2, which you'll notice is the total amount produced in the cellular respiration equation. So we've now released all the carbon dioxide. And that makes sense because if you look at glucose, C6H12O6, we started with 6 carbons in our glucose. So we've started with 6 carbons and we made 6 carbons in carbon dioxide. After this point, that citric acid is going to get broken down further into ATP, NADA, and FADA2. For each acetyl-CoA, 1 ATP is released. So for both of them, you release 2 ATP, and you also release NADA and FADA2. Remember, these are the 2 stars of the Krebs cycle. This is what we're really trying to get because they're like the check. They're going to be cashed in the final phase to make a lot of ATP for us. And so these 2 molecules are going to carry the high energy electrons to the next step. I think that got cut off, but the next step. So overall, acetyl-CoA gets broken down into carbon dioxide and citric acid, and then that citric acid gets further broken down into ATP, NADA, and FADA2. The most important in this stage are the NADA and FADA2 because they're going to be used to carry electrons to the next stage. So here is the picture of my added chart. So first, acetyl-CoA gets broken down into citric acid and 2 carbon dioxide molecules. So you can see we have 1, 2 here, plus the third from the original. So we have 3. And the other acetyl-CoA gets broken down into 2 carbon dioxides, 1, 2, and then the third, 3, as well as citric acid. That's the first part. Then citric acid is going to be further broken down into ATP, NADA, and FADA2. And you can see the same thing happens to the citric acid over here. It's broken down into ATP, NADA, and FADA2. So the Krebs cycle is a little bit more complex, but I would really think of it as those 2 steps. First, acetyl-CoA is broken down, and then citric acid gets broken down further. And the 2 main products that we get are NADA and FADA2. Those are going to continue on. And then, of course, the third product is the ATP. And then we also get carbon dioxide. So a quick little review. The main job of the Krebs cycle is metabolism. That's the breakdown of acetyl-CoA, and energy production. And when we talk about energy production, we get ATP, but most importantly, we get NADA and FADA2 for the final stage. This process takes place in the mitochondrial matrix. What happens in this step? Acetyl-CoA combines with a 4-carbon compound to form citric acid. Citric acid then gets broken down and releases ATP, carbon dioxide, NADA, and FADA2. And again, this is a cycle. So when you look at pictures of the Krebs cycle, you'll see that acetyl-CoA and citric acid are recreated and the cycle begins again and again. But you need acetyl-CoA to start the reaction. That is the only reactant for the Krebs cycle. And the products are 2 ATP, 4 CO2, as well as NADA and FADA2. So this is a good cheat sheet of what you need to know about the Krebs cycle. Here's a little picture. You can see it's much more complicated than we're going to teach you, but just notice you can see here's the pyruvate getting broken down into acetyl-CoA. That's the intermediate reaction. And then acetyl-CoA gets turned into citric acid. There's one of your carbon dioxides. And then it gets broken down even further, releasing more carbon dioxide. And then finally the NADA, ATP, and FADA2. So that's really the Krebs cycle in a nutshell. Now you can quiz yourself. What are the reactants of the Krebs cycle? There is just one. If you guessed acetyl-CoA, you are right. What are the products of the Krebs cycle? This one's tough. There are 4. If you guessed ATP, NADA, FADA2, and carbon dioxide, then you are right. Where in the cell does the Krebs cycle take place? If you guessed the mitochondrial matrix, then you are right. The next thing you will do today is work on the cell processes graphic organizer. This is the same paper that we did for the glycolysis, but now you'll be doing it for the Krebs cycle. So remember, this is a summary of your learning, so make it work for you. In the center, be sure to write the title, aka the Krebs cycle. What did you start with? Those are the reactants. What did you end up with? Those are the products. Where in the cell does it happen? That would be where it happens, the blue and the color-coded key. The definition, you can also put the function for the definition. Either one works. This box will continue to leave blank until we've finished all of the steps, but please don't write anything in it because we will write in it eventually. List the steps for the Krebs cycle. You can list the steps in whatever way makes sense to you, but you'll probably end up with 2 to 4 steps in this box because the Krebs cycle is a little bit more complex. And then remember, for Draw It, you can draw whatever you want for this page that helps you remember what the Krebs cycle does and how it works. After you finish this page, you can move on to the POGL, which is shown here. You'll be working on Model 2, the Krebs cycle, which is number 8 through number 13, and then you can stop at number 13. So give it your best shot. At the end of the week, I'll post the answer key so you can check your answers. And I will also post some answer keys to the charts as well. But good luck. I miss you guys already, and I'll see you soon next class for another lesson.